Sandy, it's amazing to have you here. So delighted that you agreed to come on and give us your time. Yeah, it's a really cool thing. And I know our listeners are going to learn so much today. You've 12 books, yeah? Author
12 books, yes.
Yeah. You have award-winning programs that you share with the world. So I think, as a therapist, a mentor, and also somebody who's been a monk, who's been extricated himself from a cult, in your own words. I think we're going to have a rich and inspiring conversation around all of this. So welcome to Transform Today. And yeah, it's just lovely to have you.
Thanks for having me, Paula. Pleasure to be here. And nice to be with you guys, whoever's listening.
Great. So I've probably just given you a wonderful job title. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Sandy the man. Who are you today? How would you describe yourself, beneath the surface of all of these wonderful things you do?
Sandy the man, that's a really interesting starting question. I mean, I'm originally from Scotland. Edinburgh is my hometown. I currently live in northern Mexico in the semi-desert with my Mexican wife and 3 dogs.
Right.
And a few chickens and a goat. I made a big decision a few years ago now, that, the first 20 years of my career, because I've been doing this for 20 years, I'd written 12 books. I'd done a lot of intellectual work. And as I entered into my, should I say, early 40s, I really wanted to get back to the land as well, get back into my more into my physical body. I kind of neglected it for a while. I kind of got ultra spiritual, and it was the body was this vehicle that helped me get ultra spiritual, but it wasn't really. I wasn't really connected to the earth as much as I had been earlier on in my life. Okay. And so we decided to move to Mexico, have some land here, and build a homestead to do alongside my work. So I still do all my therapy work and my academy, and I've got my community and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the man is having a different life these days outside that work, I mean, you don't write 12 books by age 40 if you're not kind of stuck behind a laptop quite a lot.
Exactly. And all dedicated and very output driven, I'm hearing you saying is you want to get into that land of the body, get back into the feminine aspects of our nature, where we're receiving more. It's much more organic, isn't it? Because everything happens in the land of the body. And, when we sometimes can have that sort of spiritual bypass a bit of keep on keeping on, and we have this elevated emotional experience, but actually, where are my feet and how am I feeling about my life?
Yeah. And it's been great to learn what physical fatigue feels like again. I got good at mental fatigue if you've written all day or whatever.
Yeah.
But the other day I was shoveling stones for an hour, and I was exhausted. My heart was going a million miles an hour.
Yeah.
So growing things, learning to do that kind of side of humanity and human life, I think we can kind of, in this modern world, we can kind of lose that side of things, and we just go to the supermarket, we stick it on a trolley, we put it on a credit card. There's no, apart from the hassle, and sometimes we get delivered these days. I don't have that luxury here in Mexico, but some of us don't even do anything really for our food apart from earn the money for it, And there's something different about actually participating in the process and reconnecting with it. But it's not a major thing that I'm doing. You asked me my personal life as opposed to my professional. So that's what I'm trying to do more in my personal life.
And that's lovely. I used to have an allotment, and I loved all of that growing and the footprint. And, when the kids were little, I'd teach them about the footprint and where it come from. And we'd be growing stuff, and we'd get the salad and the potatoes. And so they knew where it was coming from. So I do think that is quite lovely. But it also teaches them a core value of connection, of what's happening, how many people it takes to get that stuff to the supermarket. What's behind all that infrastructure? So, I always felt like it was teaching them about connection as well, and how we're all interdependent and how we all need each other. That was like, that's quite lovely. I used to love doing that. Just making me think I'd like to do it again. Anyway.
I don't know if it's psychological, but I'm sure the eggs taste better when I've had a hen pecking at my ankles whilst I was trying to get it. It just seems to
I'm
take
sure
better.
it is. Yeah. It's the good
But anyway,
life. It's the good
yeah,
life, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So tell me, so these big changes, we were talking about, haven't seen you since 2019. So then you were quite sort of ingrained in the Shire community, yes?
hmm
It's where you
yep.
be, yeah, I guess you were ordained a monk in there.
I was a monk for 14 years.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your move away from there and what that taught you about in terms of being grounded in spirituality and yeah, just
I
really,
mean, I mean, it was a long journey. It was 14 years. I'd dedicated my life to it. I never thought I would ever not be a monk.
yeah,
I had no exit strategy.
yeah, yeah,
As and they say that no one joins a cult, they join something good, and that was very true for me. I benefited personally from the techniques that I learned with them, but what I noticed was the teaching stopped resonating with me as much. And I started having to kind of almost do some mental gymnastics or
yeah,
edit it myself so I could be aligned with it. And in its simplest way, I decided to explore whether I had any trauma a few years ago.
yeah,
My wife had been struggling with panic attacks out of nowhere, and she was also a monk, which was
yeah,
very confusing because we should have known, it was all about peace and transcending the mind and stuff. But she was going through a really hard time, and she met a trauma therapist, and I started working with him too because I saw the difference in my wife,
yeah,
and I think it was a big contributing factor that as I healed my trauma and therefore my inner injuries, my shame, actually, my toxic shame, as I learned, there's this thing called toxic shame.
sure,
And as I healed that, certain things that were going on in the so-called spiritual community, aka cult,
yeah,
they stopped being okay for me. It was almost like at some level, I'd been, because of my shame, because of my trauma, because of my certain beliefs that I'd been carrying. At some level, I believed I deserved to be treated badly, if that makes
yeah,
any sense.
no, yeah, it does, because there's not that whole sense of belonging, and it's that push, isn't it, to be what people want, that version,
hmm
so
hmm
yeah, it does make sense. And
I also started learning more in depth about things like narcissism and things. And I started going, oh my God, like my spiritual teacher is ticking all the boxes. What's going on here? You
yeah,
know?
it's a bit
And
scary.
and for a while it was like I had to do, like I said, some mental gymnastics and we were also kind of conditioned in a way to like see him as has transcended and beyond the mind. Therefore, he wasn't really in everything he did was in service to my awakening. And if
Yeah,
I had a problem with something he was doing, it was my judgment, it was my problem. Does that make sense? So one of the
oh,
things with a cult is that if it's not working for you, it's your fault. If it's working for you, it's the teachers and the teachings uh, cause
benefit,
for it
yeah,
working. Does that make sense?
yeah,
So it's like this interesting dynamic where you're kind of conditioned to blame yourself to it must be me that's being triggered. I shouldn't be so offended, or maybe I'm judging something by the way my teacher just talked to me, or what he just did, or how he just gaslit me,
yeah,
or abused me or bullied me or did something and publicly shamed me, or whatever it was always pointed back at must be me. And to a point there's a little bit truth in there that we there is something to learn if we have a trigger or whatever. So I just started to see that the teacher was hadn't transcended at all. In fact, quite the opposite.
yeah,
And there was aspects of the teaching itself that I no longer could align with. And
sure,
it all came to a head when I mean for about a year I've been doing this mental gymnastics, and I've been kind of raising it with the people I trusted in the organization, going, there's something not right here. This is not right. That this And we would have these long conversations about it and stuff. And there was a point where I was literally standing in the shower one day, and I made a prayer just to, help me get out of this,
yeah,
I was living in the spiritual community up a mountain in Spain. I was all in, okay.
yeah, I know, yeah,
And my fiance at the time, not my wife, but my fiance, she'd kind of at that point was still in the kind of the mindset of you're either in or you're out. And I don't know how we would work if you weren't in.
Oh
So there
God.
was also the underlying like, oh, how do I get out of this with my relationship intact as well, you know?
Yeah.
So I made a prayer, and within a week, I remember sitting outside having my morning coffee. It was a beautiful mountain scene. We're in, only like 20 houses on this mountainside. So it's
Yeah.
just forest all around us, big valley down towards the ocean, beautiful place. Another reason why I didn't really want to leave, it's like partly it's a really nice
Yeah. It's
lifestyle.
nice. Yeah.
But I made a prayer, and I just got the hit to go inside, and that day, Christina was having a conversation with her therapist
Mm.
in the office halfway along the corridor, and as I was walking along the corridor, I overheard the words, "I've not told Sandy this, but I'm sorry, but
Like
I
a
had to
little
listen.
blast.
I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but something rooted me to the ground." And
Yeah.
I overheard her telling her therapist something that had happened with our spiritual teacher when they'd been away for a weekend in Barcelona, just like having
Yeah.
some time away from the mountain, her and a friend. And the therapist, who's much more educated at that point in this sort of stuff, said, "You're talking about this and just like it's just normal, but that is officially physical abuse, molestation that
Yeah.
happened to you." And it was like this moment of enough's enough. We were out within 48 hours. And that was only because there was a bit of a process and a protocol to go through to be officially out.
Wow, my
Um,
gosh.
and the good news is we didn't go out without a bang, because at the time there was probably maybe 500 or so teachers in the world, and we took over almost 300 with us.
Wow.
And by say with us, I don't mean we went and created our own cult, not at all. I mean they left with at the same time when we brought out what happened, and we also shone a light and kind of exposed other stuff that had been going on. And so we, those that stayed, they stayed for their own reasons, but they
Yeah.
know the truth. They know who their teacher is now,
Yeah.
and
Good.
it was shocking to discover that your spiritual teacher is a fraud.
Yeah. Well,
It was a lot of grief that I went through, losing maybe, it sounds like a number that's not believable, but I was involved with the family, the Bright Path Ashaya family, 14 years,
yeah.
Lots of people came with us, but some of my old best mates never came. I lost
Yeah.
about 200 people,
Yeah.
some of them acquaintances, some of them had lived in our house,
Sure.
they never spoke to us again when we left, and
Yeah.
they still don't think they're in a cult, but that's evidence enough that we were best friends, and then when we were out, we were gone. So that us them mentality, you're in or you're out, that
Yeah.
should be enough for
Wow.
them to go, oh my God, maybe I've been conditioned.
Yeah.
You know, so there was a lot of grief about losing some of our best friends. And personally, I decided to really sift for the gold, see the opportunity in this for myself, see,
Yeah.
not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and see if I could turn some lemons into lemonade. And so I went through about a year and a half. I mean, it's still kind of going today, but a real intense year and a half.
Mm.
Seeing, what within me got me into that. What was it really? What researching cults, researching narcissism, researching psychopathy, sociopathy, understanding like all the stuff that had went on, the group think, coercive control, narcissism, the list goes on,
Yeah.
and healing in myself stuff, and not just going, oh, it was just the guy, he lost his way or whatever, but actually what in the teaching itself must have been off for the inner circle at the top to be so toxic. I witnessed so much when we left. They went into damage control, so there was so much lying and betrayal and backstabbing and all that stuff going on. And how's that possible? What's going on? Because these guys think they're still noble and they're doing the right thing. That's the interesting thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, that is the
Um,
interesting thing.
and
Yeah.
so, I found this kind of foundational keystone or two out of place, which enabled that the there's truth in it, of course, but
Sure.
there's slight twists in it, or slightly different contexts
Yeah.
that allow it to become culty, allow for all the other stuff. So
And
yeah, it's been a big deal, and a big rebuilding of our life. And I'm actually about to start a podcast with my wife called Unculted,
uh,
because what we found was it was like for us, it was like a year or so leading up to it, but then within a 48 period, we were out, but it's taken much longer to get the cult out of us. And so the purpose of that podcast is getting out of a cult, but also getting the cult out of us, which is a
Sure.
much bigger thing. There's a lot of conditioning, there's lots of beliefs, there's lots of wounds and trauma and stuff. And some people can leave cults, but they can find themselves either creating or getting into another one because they actually haven't healed the core stuff that got me there in the first place, and things like that. So yeah, it's a big deal. So we're starting Unculted soon.
Well, brilliant. And, that's going to be so great for so many people because, just going back to that belonging, it is like finding a family as well. And it does
Mhm.
have a higher purpose, or
Mhm.
it promotes a higher purpose. And we all
Mhm.
want to have meaning and purpose in life. And I'm just
Mhm.
thinking about our listeners now, because of course that's quite macro, it's a big organization, but you can delineate that down to a lot of spiritual teachers who, you think, well, they're saying the right things, but it doesn't feel right. Or do you know that type of what's going on here? And can I trust myself? And or am I just kindergarten? So, what
Mhm.
advice would you give to people, like even your younger self? What would have you said to yourself 14 years ago about what you know now as the markers of, right, this is what you want to look out for? Because we've got so many, even linked to a lot of the Me Too, we've got so many things unraveling and have been for years around the idea of spiritual cults, haven't we?
Yeah, and what I'd say, and what you reminded me to say, is that yes, we were in the kind of love and light turns dark spiritual cult.
Mm,
However, the cult mentality, coercive control, group think, us versus them,
yeah,
narcissistic behavior and traits, gaslighting, all of these things can show up in any group,
yeah. In an
um,
organization,
any
Yeah,
organization. And you can even have the cult of one or two, in a marriage or a relationship. And a lot of my therapy work, having with what I've gone through, I'm doing a lot of work with people that have had a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic husband or wife, and over time, it's not so obvious, because often there's a lot of love bombing at the beginning. Okay,
yeah,
that's one of the classic things. Like there's you're welcomed with open arms, and it's a very beautiful thing. You're welcomed into this. It was the Ashaya family,
yeah,
we were all family until anyone questioned anything or dared to leave, though. So
sure.
it's a family with pretty strict us them rules, and an underlying threat that if you don't toe the line or you step out of line, then you're going to be shamed or have a black mark against you. You're going to slow your spiritual awakening, or ultimately you'll be cast out. And that feeds to the fears and the unresolved stuff that gets us into these things in the first place.
Because it's an extended family and the dysfunction
Hmm.
that could have happened
Hmm.
in the original unit carries on
Hmm.
in the extended one. So
Exactly.
that's
And
like
there can be
quite,
cults. Sorry.
yeah. Oh, go on. I was just going to say that's like quite interesting in itself, and that is almost why we gravitate toward the familiar, why we're
Mhm.
in this, oh, okay. And then the conditioning that's getting triggered is the same issues we had in our own family. We're seeing where we're unhealed
Yeah.
through, not through even a sort of mean-spirited, just a conditioning societal, just the way people were at the time. We
Hmm.
could have experienced, kids are seen and not heard, we,
Hmm.
the guy gets it to do this way, the girl gets to do it this way. So just all
Hmm.
of these norms, all of these values that are quite, can be quite limiting. You can find yourself becoming the special one in the group, love bombed in the
Hmm.
beginning, and you're this wonderful author throwing out all these books as well, got
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you've got kudos. It's something
Yeah, they saw the good golden ticket with
table.
me and that's the thing. They think like people that are kind of dumb or damaged or whatever get involved in cults, but actually the cults target successful people.
Yeah,
They do because they rely on the people they bring in to maintain and make the cult more successful. So there was a lot of love bombing, But the thing with love bombing is that it can go on for years, but then there's a point where the tap is switched off, and we're at that point we're in, and we can then unconsciously spend sometimes years trying to get that back and blaming, thinking it must be us, it must be me, that something that I've done or whatever, you know. So yeah, like I said, no one joins a cult. They join something good. I love the community. I love what some of the stuff that they taught. I loved the travel. I loved, you know, teaching around the world. It gave
Yeah.
me inspiration for some of my books. Although I like I said, I've changed the teaching to make it more modern and less culty in my books. But the point I'm trying to make is like it was really helpful until it became unhealthy.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because where
Hmm.
you were at that particular time, there was a huge amount of joy that was brought through it as well.
Hmm.
You know, so it's like, okay, so we all make mistakes. There isn't anyone human who hasn't made a mistake, who hasn't
Hmm.
done that. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's also a nice thing for us to step back a little bit and go easy on ourselves in terms of self-acceptance. Okay, that's where I was, but by the grace of something within me, that higher power, I could see this wasn't right for me. And it's hard to just completely let go and step back to that present moment where you are owning your full power. Because,
Yeah.
you know, I've worked with people who have experienced similar things, and one of the big betrayals can often be the betrayal of self. That when it's also been done and you've done the dance around it and the therapy, that it's, you know, letting the story go as well around it, right? Okay, but here I am now, and what you and is it Marnie are going to do is, Christina, what
My
you and
wife. Yeah,
Christina are going to do is, you know, shine a light on that.
we
And
are.
you know, through your podcast. And that's also going to help people just see the dynamics of being human, because in our humanity we are going to make mistakes. And it's
Hmm.
how do we hold the mistakes when there's respect and love and everything else there, in that greater power that, you know,
Hmm.
we might call our birthless self, source, cosmic, whatever we're saying. But how do we bring that into the land of the body so we are experiencing, on the one hand, the goodness, you know, of our, you know, ultimate inner power, you know, the power within us, holding of the fragility of our humanity, but, you know, keeping that balancing act of both being equally important, so we
Hmm.
get to rise with joy as well, because, you know, surely that's got to be the purpose as well, you know, of living.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of spirituality, and what this showed me is that it wasn't just isolated to this one organization. Like, there's
Yeah,
actually an issue within spirituality in general, I've observed, which is actually there's a dark side of spirituality, a toxic side, depending on how you engage it, you know?
yeah,
So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying here. You know, it's almost like spirituality is trying to transcend our humanness, and I don't believe in that anymore. I think it's actually embracing our humanness on all levels. And so one of the most spiritual things we can do is to be fully human and
absolutely.
not try to bypass it or avoid it or suppress it, have shame about it, or judge the hell out of it or whatever. Like, actually, the irony of it is that you can go around full circle back to, oh, actually, what I always was is actually really enough.
Yeah,
And that's kind of almost the message of spirituality. But what can happen is to get back to enoughness, to contentment, to peace, to self-love, unconditional love, total acceptance on all levels. To get back to that, we can sometimes go around the whole spiritual, you know, a million and one self-help books and
yeah,
courses and retreats and teachings and techniques, and most of our days filled with, you know, all these spiritual to-do lists, I call it. You know,
yeah,
one of my courses, I listed like something like 50 things that was on my spiritual to-do list. And I
yeah,
was like, wait
crazy.
a minute, there's a lot of doing involved in that. If one of the purposes of spirituality is to get back to your beingness.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I saw this trap in spirituality of a part of us that actually appeals to our ego. The part it actually appeals to our ego. this part of us, this doer that believes it needs to do stuff in order to eventually become worthy, I guess, of ourself, of love, of peace, of contentment, of enoughness. And so that's one of the traps, for example. And a lot of the spiritual world is you're getting all these things to do list, spiritual things to do list, as I call it.
Yeah.
And
The shopping
I'm
bag.
not saying throw it out. I've gone on a journey where I was like kind of jaded by spirituality when I first left. You know, it was really quite raw and like,
Yeah.
what do I believe in now? What is true? You know, and I've kind of come to really fall back in love with spirituality.
Nice.
But I have a whole different relationship with spirituality now. You know, which feels
Yeah.
much healthier indeed.
And I think that that sort of having the fully human, fully divine pieces together is really what the mystical marriage, the alchemy, is about. It's not about ignore, you know, we can't have this circle of universal love and we'll put the things we don't like about Sandy or Paula on the outside of it. You know, everything's welcome, including your shadow parts, your protector parts, including all of you. And I think when we can make peace with the darkness in us and see light in that, we can then make peace with that in others. So it gives us that opportunity to rise, you know, in a really grounded way, though. You know, I know I'm using the word rise, but it means that, you know, we can be in this land of this body where we experience the great joys, the great loves, you know, all of that pleasure that we can get out of life here and now. You know, that's like sort of a miracle in itself. We could just dress it all down to being, you know, we could go, right, let's just come like a really little funnel here and go, if I'm being, I'm not in judgment, because we're not. When we're in the power of presence, we just can't be, you know. And so if I'm in this being, then I can find the parts of me that have forgotten their love and return them home and give them a seat at the table and tell them they're enough, you know? And I think that that's one of the things that can happen in spiritual communities. They can forget to focus on everything's looking to return to love, you know, and anything in you that isn't accepted, you know, as there must be something wrong. And, you know, I had a similar experience. I left a community after 25 years. And in that experience, you know, I was saying, I'm not going to be wearing the same denim jacket as you anymore. I don't see that it fits me anymore. You know, so I can relate to the grief. And it took me probably 3 to 5 years, if I'm really honest, to step back, because you're raised in that community and you've got, you know, you're given leadership roles. So it does take time to step out. But the biggest thing that I learned from stepping out is that everything is a call to love, everything. And in love, there is no separation. And if in love, there's no separation, then you and I are one. And if I can meet you again in the field of oneness, then what mistakes have been made in the operating system of my little personality who wonders, is she good enough? You know, will it all be okay? You know, all of that jazz, you know, all the conditions we put on ourselves. If we can just let that soften and coexist with the fact that actually on one level, we're all one. Doesn't make behaviors correct, but it does give us the chance to marry in harmony again. So we can birth that sort of, you know, power within us, more into our washing the dishes, more into our going the supermarket, getting pecked by the hen. You know, it's not just about being, you know, cross-legged, is it? You know, it's about every little moment of living. And there's something, you know, I love that I had that experience, because it just makes me want to just come home to love all the time now in a different way. You know, it's I feel, you know, it's a gift actually, because I can see there just is no judgment in the true love. And when you get that, nothing hurts in the same way anymore. The essence, it just you've got a big fly.
I got a fly decided to arrive into the room.
Yeah.
Don't know how I got here. Sorry to interrupt that beautiful
No.
speech.
No. Sorry. But the essence is there with you, isn't it? And when that's your friend, you are being in your physical life. You know, you're being in your doing life, you know, which is pretty special.
And I think the irony with, or the interesting thing, or the paradox of oneness, like you're talking about, is it does start with us really embracing and finding our uniqueness and our individuality, our sovereignty, our agency, our autonomy. Otherwise, we can kind of do that trying to get back to oneness, but it's actually fear based because we're trying to escape ourself almost.
Mm.
And that's what I saw, and that's why these days my tagline is unifying therapy and spirituality,
Yeah.
because I really feel it's so important to I just, it's just natural for me to do it in my sessions and my work, but to bring them together. And for example, like you talked about rising, the thing that I was involved with was called ascension,
Mm.
and we're always trying, refining consciousness and ascending up to higher levels of consciousness. And Hawkins talks about the levels of consciousness. He's got like a
Yeah.
triangle or a
Yeah.
pyramid or whatever, and he's got the kind of in the red zone at the bottom, he's got shame and fear and
Yeah.
sadness and anger and these kind of
Jealousy, all that.
hurt and stuff, and then it rising up eventually to peace, love, joy, enlightenment, and the higher levels. And
Mm.
what I saw is a lot of people are wanting that, and it's natural to want that, and it's great to aspire to that, and it's great to explore more of yourself and discover all these different states and experiences of consciousness that reside within us. That's part of knowing thyself. But if we try to rise up without actually healing our inner injuries, our trauma, it's like kind of two things happen. Either it gets distorted and toxic, and we end up with spiritual bypassing, and it's a surface level facade in a way. It's not really honest and real. It's, you can access a state, but I knew a lot of monks and I knew their buttons. You know what I mean? Like they were all
Yeah.
like pretending to be love and light, but honestly, I knew them. I could poke them with
Yeah.
one question and trigger them,
Yeah.
So it
No,
wasn't
I
really a
do know what you
stable,
mean.
it wasn't
Yeah.
really a stable experience of themselves or peace, love, or joy, or whatever. They're quite easy to. So that's why I'm like, a lot of people are trying to get up there, but it's like having weights below your feet, hanging, a rope and a big weight underneath you. And so by combining and unifying therapy and spirituality, you can heal the inner traumas. You can heal the stuff that's kind of keeping us stuck in the trauma zone, keeping our autonomic nervous system stuck in fight, flight, freeze, flood,
Oh,
fawn. When I finally released the trauma from my nervous system and I regulated my autonomic nervous system, my ANS, I found peace that I'd been trying to get through spirituality.
yeah.
And I was literally at peace. And so my whole relationship with spirituality changed because I was no longer using it to try to be peaceful. I was actually, it all became
Uh,
about knowing thyself. And
Yeah.
therapy is more about, why am I? Why am I not at peace? Why am I anxious? Why am I got this health condition? Why am I got this pattern in my relationship?
Mm.
So therapy is more like, why am I? And I believe spirituality is much more simple than we make it. Not all these millions of techniques, it's who am I? And that's really what, for me, how it's come
Yeah,
out in the
that's beautiful.
wash in a way.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And just that connection of really kindness as well, just being connected, being committed to who you are as a human, to be part of the human family, to be living it, to be the love in action, is really important because we can't do that if our nervous system is, shut down. If we are in a situation, we can't have an open heart. Go back to another triangle, Maslow. If we're not safe with a home and we've not got shelter, security, all of those things, then how can we have this beautiful open heart? We can't really, because it's going to get limited. It'll be temporary. Whereas when you go in and do the inner work, and you go into, for me, the land of the body is where it all takes place. So it's like, is the body safe? Am I feeling that I can receive here? And it's even okay to go, actually, in that particular condition, it isn't. So I'm going to protect a boundary there. I'm going to protect that as okay. So, and that is as elevated and ascended as, going off to the cosmos, being able to be grounded, happy, contented, and, have an autonomic nervous system, as you said, that actually feels peace, so doesn't leave the meditation room and gets triggered 5 minutes later, has a consistent, one of the things, having had a little time around your community, I noticed that, there was volatile energy straight after sessions, so that tells you the peace level wasn't in there. So yeah, it's interesting. And that's why I think the greatest work of our time is to create safety in the nervous system so we can receive, to be all we can be as a divine human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Well,
that's,
the trauma corrodes our inner trust and safety. And so a lot of the work I do with people is to actually rebuild that inner trust and safety by healing the traumas,
yeah,
and I find, I meditate for thousands and thousands of hours, literally. I did a 6 month intensive to begin with, 18 hours a day, sometimes meditating, and many, many retreats over the 14 years. We were
yeah,
just meditating all day and sometimes all night. And what I found was like the meditation was kind of offsetting my traumatized nervous system. So I would get peace. It'd be nice and lovely, but after a while, the nervous system would just go back to the place it needed to be, it believed it needed to be, based on
yeah,
my beliefs, my conditioning, my trauma, my injuries, inner mental, emotional
yeah,
injuries, etc., etc. And when the nervous system's amazing. You need to fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn. You're meant to, if something happens, go into it temporarily, but then the nervous system's meant to regulate itself back pretty quick. And
mm.
the issues when we get this fly's running, it's
The
like the wind
flies
is kind
loving
of
you.
flying
Yeah.
around all but again, even flies have got something to teach you, right? They're flying around your head, peace, to
Piece
have
of
peace with them.
fly.
But yeah, so I think you're absolutely on task there, and the trick is, I think what we're talking about today is a more honest form of spirituality. I think that's what I'm taking from our conversation, or what the theme just seems to be coming through, is this kind of having honesty within ourselves. And it's incredible how for many positive intentions, how much dishonesty there is within people's general lives, but also the world of spirituality.
Yeah, no, I heard a little 5 minute chat you did on that, and I loved it. How we might be dishonest because we feel a little bit ashamed. So we might be dishonest because we want to please people. We might be dishonest because we want to look a particular way. And
Mm-hmm.
the absolute courage it takes to look at yourself with that level of vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
is amazing. And I'd love it if you could share with the people listening, what can they do to sort of de-armor, to get to that level of courage where they can be so vulnerable, so tender, and see, yeah, just the whole shaboodle really, and how can we hold that, because it does take huge courage, doesn't it?
It does. It can, and but once you experience the benefits of honesty, the connection that comes from it, the healing and growth that comes from it, it supercharges anything you're doing, just growth wise, learning wise, therapy wise, or whatever. There was a point where I was in a session with my own therapist,
Yeah,
and we're several sessions into our therapeutic relationship. And I recognized at one point that I was still at that moment presenting a facade to her,
right.
as opposed to being myself. And it was a really shocking moment. And I could have just kind of ignored that, but actually, I actually decided to share it with her. And I said, I realize I'm still presenting you Sandy Newbigging, the guy that I want to present to the world. And I'm not really fully just vulnerably, unedited, sharing what's really, really going on within myself.
Yeah,
And it was a turning point for me. I think honesty is the foundation of spirituality these days, or therapy work, or healing work, or even manifestation work, or any of it. It starts with honesty. It's so fundamental, because we're dealing with reality then. See,
yeah,
this woman that I was working with, she couldn't really help me if I was presenting an imagined facade to her. She could only help the facade. She could only work with what she was being given. So she
right.
could never, if I didn't let her near the actual honest, raw bit of me, the bit that I was ashamed of, the bit that I had rejected, that would still stay there and live there. And
And this
so,
is what happens, isn't it, in the law of attraction things, because people go, oh, I'd like this, and here's my list, but they're not in alignment with their emotional body, is not congruent. So they're not gravitating or magnetizing the feeling. So, like you just said, which I absolutely love, how can we truly help the real Sandy if we've only got the facade, the public Sandy, not the private
Mhm,
Sandy?
mhm.
That's like, I just think that's genius in itself. That's what we're looking for, isn't it? What goes on in the private you. That's what's gonna, bring the transformation.
And surprisingly, when I finally saw that, the results that I've had with my clients over the last 4 or 5 years has been like nothing compared to like the previous 15. It's like it's gone turbo to
Yeah.
create that level of trust and safety so that there can be an honest conversation. They're not going to be judged. They're not going to be gaslit. I'm going to do my absolute best to see, hear, and understand them, and to welcome whatever they bring to the table.
Mm,
Never shame them, never hold it against them. Just create a safe space.
absolutely.
It's the foundation of all therapy, coaching work, or whatever. I
Even
want to
men.
share why we end up not doing that, though, if that's right,
Yeah.
'cause I think it's
Yeah,
really
that's what
helpful for the
we do. Yeah.
listeners.
I think it'd be really
But
helpful.
Gabor Mate shares something great about this. He says that we all have two needs:
Yeah.
authenticity and attachment. And by attachment, in spiritual world, you might, oh, attachment, that's a bad thing. No, in this context, attachment is a very good thing. It's
Yeah.
connection, being seen, heard, understood, wanted, loved,
Yeah.
accepted. We all need that. And you're denying and lying to yourself if you think you don't need that. We need it.
We do
And
do
why would
need
you want to suppress that or deny that from you anyway? It's one of the most beautiful things of being
focus.
human is to have
Yeah.
connection. And that's where we find this oneness I believe, and love that you were talking about earlier. And so he believes that we need this attachment, or authenticity, which is essentially to be ourselves.
And to be
Can
accepted to
you
be
know?
yourself, because how often do we edit ourselves because we
Mhm,
think it's not acceptable? And yet, our
mhm.
core relationship, if it comes down to accepting ourselves, means then others will accept us because we do,
Well, this is what Gabor is saying. He's saying that we have these needs for authenticity and attachment. And he says that he goes on to say, if our authenticity ever threatens our attachment, our
Mm.
likelihood of being accepted, loved, wanted, etc., then our attachment will always trump authenticity. In
Which
other
is
words,
crazy, isn't it? But
what's that?
well, it's crazy because when what we actually want and what we really want is to be authentic, but actually the attachments, boil down to, are we belonging? Are we
Mhm,
accepted? There's that. I've just got this image of a apron where it says, "Behave like this, everyone thinks we're normal."
mhm,
Because I can see why it does, because unconsciously our conditioning, pre-9, we're already cooked, aren't we, in many ways, and it's all running on autopilot. I had an
mhm,
experience recently where I stopped writing for 6 months, and then when I sat down with my mentor, it was simply because I wasn't sure a particular person in my family would like it.
mhm,
But if I hadn't have gone and unraveled it, because there was what you're talking about, my attachment to the belonging and the authenticity of the writing,
mhm,
the attachment won. So I'm just giving you an
mhm.
example.
Yeah.
And it won for 6 months, 5 to 6 months.
But I think it helps us to know this theory because it tells us that there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing wrong with me. It's natural to seek that connection, that belonging, that love. And we're social animals, where we
Yeah,
need it. We need
I
community. We
love
need
that.
connection. We need connection and we need community, whether we like it or not. And so, and this can stem from even earlier life stuff. Okay. So that's like the theory of it. But, like when we're very first born, 0 to 1 or 2, connection equals protection, protection equals safety. So we need
Yeah,
this connection right at the beginning. We need that connection. And if that doesn't happen, it's called proximal abandonment, where the parent is in our proximity, but the child still feels abandoned. If
yeah,
the
yeah.
if for some reason the connection and the bonding is not thwarted in some way, the mother or father could be busy, distracted, postnatal depression, just be super busy with other the other kids they've got, or the parents could be having relationship issues or whatever, but something that causes that child to feel abandoned. That's one of the first things that we want to look out for in therapy if that's happened, because it's happened to so many of us.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what comes from that is this thing called toxic shame, because the child, it's a very scary proposition to accept the parent can't give me what I need. And so they usually default to, it must be me, it's my fault.
Sure.
And that's it's safer for the child to accept it must be me than my parent can't give me what I want. That's much scarier. And that's where the identity of shame, there's something wrong with me, I'm unworthy, I don't deserve it. Other people's needs are always more important than mine. Blah, 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 blah. We can create this identity. And then we wonder why later in life we're self-sabotaging or procrastinating, or we can't hold down a relationship, or we have conflict relationship, or we find it hard to connect in our relationships, blah,
Or
blah,
am
blah. The
I
list
enough
goes
and
on.
is there enough? You know, the
What was
two,
that?
the pivotal, am I enough and is there enough? You know,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of the boiling down question is there's
Mm-hmm.
a nagging belief that
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong and that something is me, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and
But we
that's,
started this whole conversation talking about honesty,
yeah,
and I was just trying to explain why it's no one wakes up in the morning intending to be dishonest. No one wakes up in the morning intending to have a facade and not be
yeah,
themselves. I don't think. No, maybe some, but not the majority of us. I
yeah,
certainly wasn't. But when I, felt rejected when I was younger or whatever, I rejected that, but they'd been rejected, and I started morphing into this version that I believed would be more acceptable, loving. And I was almost like everyone I met, I would try to figure out what I needed to be for them to accept me and love me. And I was like a chameleon.
yeah,
And in
no,
that process, you compromise yourself, you lose yourself. And that disconnection is one of the reasons we're feeling lonely, because we've actually disconnected from ourselves and we don't know who we are or what we are. So
yeah,
this is what I'm talking about, the importance of unifying therapy and spirituality, because we talk about knowing thyself all the time in spirituality, but actually a lot of it's found in the therapy world as well, right?
yeah,
And
definitely.
so it's when I talk about knowing thyself these days, it's on multiple levels. It's not just peace, stillness, being, but it's also what is your unique flavor? What's your uniqueness? What were you
Love
born
that.
here to
Love
be and
that.
do? What were you born to be and do? What is your natural gifts and talents? What's your purpose? What excites you? What brings you joy naturally? We all have our own kind of unique map of happiness almost. And if we're
Yeah,
always trying to fit into the society's idea of happiness or the advertiser's idea of what makes us happy, then it's never going to be fully satisfying. And we can get ourselves into cults, for example, or whatever in the pursuit of
of
finding
happiness.
ourselves again.
Yeah, yeah. So if you were going to say to our listeners, something that would, a practice that you think is pivotal to what gets you into the core of knowing who Sandy is, at his vulnerable, the complexity of you, what would you share with other people who are sitting here thinking, you know, that would be really uncomfortable looking at myself. How would you help them start the journey? Because often it's that first step, isn't it? Where you go, right, something's got to change, and that something's me. It's got to change.
I would say to them that the most your most authentic self is your most beautiful and radiant self. It's quite the opposite of the fear of finding them again is quite the opposite actually.
Yeah.
We stop living in fear. We find that love that you were talking about so beautifully earlier in this podcast. And what's the first step? Well, the first step is to see if any of this is resonating with you, and you start to observe the times in your day or week when you aren't being yourself, when there's this nagging thing in the back of your mind that's saying that I'm not being me right now, that I'm presenting a facade.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking my truth. Now there's discernment. You don't always have to speak your truth. Don't have to be honest with
Yeah.
every single person. You're discerning with this, right? I'm not just saying you go and split up with your husband or you or whatever, but we want to bring more honesty into our life. We want to because the honesty is our roadmap back to our uniqueness and our authentic self. So know that actually the bit of you that you've rejected is actually was never worthy of being rejected in the first place. It was usually a misunderstanding, actually. When you get into
Yeah,
therapy and you actually get to the root cause as to why, what was really going on, it wasn't often what we thought at the time.
exactly.
We
Yeah.
came to certain conclusions at a very young age about ourselves, based on very limited information. And so often with therapy, we're just going back and actually reconnecting with reality and going, well, you believed this, but what was really going on? Now that you
Yeah.
have the benefit of hindsight, and suddenly it changes our perspective on things. So I'd start with that, and I'd also, is there a question you ask everybody?
There is, yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
jumping ahead? Sorry.
No, I was just about to say to you, this would be a lovely time because we're also talking a bit about the inner child here, aren't we? Where it all began
Oh
and
yeah.
stuff. So, if you had a magic wand and you could transform the lives of young people, what would you change? So, you haven't got to build the infrastructure, it's just the magic wand. So, you could definitely just change something. And if you think about it, Sandy, with our conversation, it's going to be changing for all the inner kids in everyone.
I don't know if I've understood your question right, but this is the answer that's come to me. Okay,
Okay.
so I'm sorry if it's not what I should be saying,
Don't
but
be.
listen, what I'd say to all of us is that, by this point in our life, whether you're 15 or 50
Yeah.
or 60, there's a very low chance that you've got to this point in your life without some kind of physical injury or accident.
Mm. Yeah.
There's a very low chance you haven't had a broken bone or a cut or some sort of bruise or injury or some sort of
Yeah.
physical injury. Even age 10, 15, it's really low chance you've got to
Yeah.
that age without some kind of injury. And in the same way, there's a really low chance that we get to 15 or 50 without some kind of mental and emotional injury as well.
Yeah.
It's just
Sure.
inevitable. It's just inevitable because life is happening, and we can have an injury here and there. And that's really all that trauma is. It's an
Yeah.
inner wound. It's where the name Latin roots of the word trauma comes from is wound or injury.
Yeah.
And so what would I do with this magic wand? I would take all shame and stigma out
Yeah.
of trauma and mental health, and I'd want them all to kind of respect and relate to mental health equally as they would with physical health. And I think that if we had no stigma, if we had no shame, we had no like, oh, there's no shame in breaking an arm playing
Yeah.
football or whatever. But if you get a wound because something happens when you're an inner injury, mental emotional injury,
Yeah.
because of something the referee or the dad says from the sidelines when you're playing football, then there's something to hide about that. And it shouldn't be that way. And I
No.
think if we could take the stigma and shame out of it right from the get-go, we wouldn't be needing to have half of these conversations now that we're having, because it would be
Exactly.
dealt with so much quicker. When you have a physical injury, what do? You give it some TLC,
Yeah.
love,
Exactly.
time,
That's
attention,
lovely.
care.
Yeah.
You give it an ointment or a band-aid or a brace or
Yeah.
for a while until it builds its strength back up and it heals and you move on with your life. And so we want to do the same thing with mental and emotional injuries as well. We want to give
Beautiful.
it some love, some time, attention, and don't just try and bury it away or ignore it or pretend it never happened. Dealing with things much closer to when they actually happen.
Yeah.
When someone says something, not just trying to be a big boy or girl and not hide your true feelings, but actually say, ouch, that's not cool. And dealing with it at the time, there wouldn't be so many of these stored traumas that we have to deal with later in life. Does that make sense?
It makes sense and it's gorgeous. It's perfect. It works so well. If we have a broken arm, it goes in a cast and everyone sees it and everyone loves us and feels a bit sorry for us and,
Hmm.
holds us with a bit more TLC, as you
Yeah.
said. That's wonderful because it is about, stiff upper lip, the British way and
Hmm.
be seen and not heard and no, we don't talk about that, and you're hiding parts of yourself. So that's lovely advice. And, I
And
think,
what you can do in marriages and relationships, if you're close to someone and you create a culture where you can be honest, is like me and my wife, we have a very simple code word, and we'll just if either of us get hurt by something, although neither of us ever intend to, that doesn't matter. It's about
yeah,
how it was received and what it hurt. If we got hurt,
yeah, no, that's
we'll
lovely.
just say ouch. And we've created a culture in our relationship where we can just go, oh, ouch. And for us, we know what that means, you know. Before, you'd either get wounded or hurt by something, triggered, you'd go away, you'd hold the resentment, you'd come back later, you'd have an argument about something completely different or whatever, you know, or whatever. There's so many scenarios I could list there.
Something else,
So many scenarios I could list there.
Yeah.
But these days, where, you know, and in the past, we were programmed to the cult and some spiritual teachings that are quite mainstream, actually, to kind of gaslight each other and say, oh, you're not really got a problem with that, or just be more present, don't overthink it, you're just judging right now. We'd have all these spiritual concepts that were actually become very toxic because the person had been hurt, and we were actually using these spiritual concepts to spiritually bypass facing reality and having an opportunity to heal something with each other and grow together and move on even stronger. And so that's a little thing you can do. You can create a culture in your partnership. You have to talk about it and say, hey, are you willing to play with this?
Yeah.
Nice. But it's a lovely thing. And just to say, ouch, it's such a simple thing. Just ouch. Simple. And the other person goes, oh, and will often, it can just be healed in moments in our relationship, which is kind of reaching for a hug, or we'll reach and go, oh, what's about that, you know, and it's not like, we don't become therapizing each other all the time. It's not like that, but it's created a very safe and trusting relationship. And you'll never guess what? Safety and trust equals connection.
Exactly.
You know, and so we've got greater love because we've got this safety and trust. And if we've ever got an issue in any relationship, the two things that have usually got corroded and damaged is safety and trust. And that's where I always start. How do I rebuild trust and safety in this relationship if I want it to be resolved and healed and move on? How do I rebuild trust and safety? And that's another very simple way of looking at relationships.
But it's lovely. And I think, you know, people will be listening to this now. New beginning, you know, I'm going to start doing A or B or C, and maybe just creating trust and safety in your life and looking at where it isn't there could be a really great start with that. And I know you've got some fabulous programs and some great books. And I wonder if you could just like let people know about where they can find you and some of your offerings, because, you know, you've given us some really lovely, rich thoughts here about just coming back to basics and that lovely, you know, safety, trust, equaling connection. You know, if we can connect to ourselves, we can connect to the world. And if we connect to ourselves, we can learn to accept ourselves. So that's pretty beautiful. You know, from that space, then, you know, we become more full and alive, I think is the key word, as opposed to come down from it all.
As part of being honest, I'd like you to be honest with yourself. And if you're not feeling like jumping up and setting all these goals and starting all these new things, then that's also okay for you. That's part of you reclaiming your autonomy, your sovereignty, your agency, and not just being swept up in media and society, and doing it when it's maybe against your own natural clock. So I just want you to say that just somebody listening to this might need that permission, and this is part of being honest. Do I really want to do it right now or not? And if you do, great. If you don't, that's okay too. If it works for you, great. But if it doesn't, let yourself off the hook and keep your inward journey at this point, the learning, the growth, the healing, the inner inquiry, etc. Talking of which, if you do want to do some learning, I'd love for you to learn with my academy. I've got award-winning courses, all FHT accredited qualifications, my mind detox practitioner, my mind calm meditation teacher, and my Camologist, my flagship course, which teaches you my primary techniques that I've shared over the last 15 years in my books, Mind Calm, Body Calm, Calm Cure, and Mind Detox. You learn it all to cure the cause and to increase peace within yourself and others. So that's the academy. I've got a community called the Calm Clan, where we meet a couple times a month, and there's lots of resources and online retreats in there, and it's an amazingly low price. It's really tiny for what you get. And I also offer, you know, if you feel drawn to me, if you feel like you could talk to me and be honest with me, then I offer one-on-one therapy as well. And it's really therapeutic coaching. You know, it's really fun and enjoyable, actually, and insightful. And as I say, healing on many levels.
Fantastic. Sandy, you've been amazing. I love what you've shared.
At sandynewbigging.com, I forgot to say.
Oh, hang on, get that website in there.
Oh, better, yeah. I say that, but most people don't know how to spell my name. So, sandynewbigging.com. So there you go. See you over there if you want to
It'll
join
be
me.
in the show notes, guys. Don't
Oh,
worry.
nice one.
Pop it in there. All right, then. So it's been great having you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. Really loved having you here. So thank you. And thank you for
And
your
yours, it's been educational, it's been inspiring, and so thank you for the time. And we didn't even plan to talk about the cult stuff in advance, and we spent almost the whole time on it. So we got plenty of other things to share. So if in future you want to have another chat, I'd love to speak to you again. It's been really, really enjoyable, and
Oh,
good luck with Transform today.
thanks, Sandy. Cheers.